Hello, thanks everybody for having me. So I'm a psychologist, and so I have to admit I've never actually used Clio, but delighted to be here. So I've been a practicing clinician as well. I do research. So all the things I'm going to be talking about today are all evidence-based, science-backed strategies. So first, let's talk about work-life balance. And our very first thing we're going to talk about is actually, let's ask something different. Instead of talking about work-life balance, let's talk about work-life harmony. So why do I say that? Because we actually have a whole bunch of different roles that we do, and there's a fixed amount to spend. It's a terrible thing we've done in our culture to suggest that if you just try harder, you can do anything you want. But actually, it's a fixed amount of energy. If you spend it on this, it means you can't spend it on that. And so there are actually many parts of your life that you're trying to make in harmony. When we talk about work-life balance, it actually sort of assumes that they're opposites of each other, that somehow your work is not part of your life. And so they're not actually in fight with each other. They're not necessarily in conflict with each other. So how do we have harmony amongst all of our different roles? So let's talk a little bit first about the neurobiology of work-life harmony. So I like understanding how brains work so we can come up with strategies that work for how human brains work. We're going to talk a little bit about battery management. The first part we're going to talk about is what I refer to as our survival mind. This part of our brain is responsible for things like emotions, automatic thoughts, learning, memory. It gives you awesome advice if you are a cave person and your life expectancy is 30 and the kinds of threats you deal with are bear attacks. It also functions automatically and unconsciously. So anything coming out of this system is not something that you have direct control over. You can't turn it on or turn it off. And so things like emotions, even though we've been told that you can somehow try hard enough to get rid of negative emotions, are actually not something we have direct control over. It's just human biology. The other relevant part of our brain that we'll talk about is our prefrontal cortex, or our frontal lobe. And this part of our brain is responsible for executive functioning. That means things like making decisions, problem solving, concentration, planning. It can control our behavior, the things we do, the things we say. But unlike our survival mind that's always working, our frontal lobe is like a battery, and we can wear out that battery of self-control as we use it up. Often, as we see life now being kind of more uncertain than it was pre-pandemic, a lot of stressors, a lot of uncertainty, those frontal lobe batteries are worn out. And so sometimes when I see people do things, I'm like, no frontal lobes anywhere, right? Just, not really thinking that one through, are we? And so we want to think about charging that battery, okay? When I think about how much effort I put into making sure I have chargers for my cell phone in every office, every room, so I can charge no matter what, we need to be just as mindful about charging our own battery. And so you want to charge that frontal lobe. So a recharging activity is something that makes you feel more energetic at the end than when you started. Now, common ones for most people will be things like sleep, eating healthy food, staying hydrated, physical activity, being in nature, and social connection. But there's also individual differences. So for an extrovert, being with other people can be recharging. For an introvert, that might be draining. There's probably also an optimal amount. Going for a walk for 10 minutes might be recharging. Going for 7 hours might be draining. This is not the same thing as a healthy habit. And so if going for a walk makes you feel angry and irritated, then it's not a recharging activity, even if it's a healthy habit. Okay? We're really looking for things that make you smile, things that make you feel a bit lighter. One of my clients said it's like, that feeling you got as a kid when you're swinging on a swing, where you just feel a bit better. So some of the other ones I've heard people say are things like gardening, drumming, cleaning out a drawer, sitting in a car, watching the ocean. And so what we're looking for here is a lot of different ways that you can recharge your battery. We want ones that you can do if you have 2 hours free, but also ones if you only have 5 minutes. Things you can do at your desk, right? Or things you could do on a lunch break. And also things you can do when you're already low battery. right? It does take some energy to engage in a recharging activity, but hopefully we get into a virtuous cycle rather than a vicious cycle where that we're using energy to engage in a recharging activity, but then that recharging activity gives us more energy. And so you want someone you're low battery as well. One of mine, when I'm really low battery, is basically like cuddling in my bed with a heated blanket, right? You need the ones like that. And so in some studies that we did, this had a direct impact on how well people were functioning, how well their charge was. And so you can see there's a big difference in terms of the number of days people missed at work, their effort at work or presenteeism, and the number of days they spent unwell. And you can see a big difference between people who were charged versus people who reported they were empty. Okay, our next tip is to be mindful that that battery is a fixed amount. Again, it's a real disservice that we do when we just act like you can take on as many things as you want. But actually, we want to be mindful about how we're spending that battery. If you spend it on this, it means you can't spend it on that. And so understanding how you're spending your day, your battery in general, right, can give you a good idea about whether you're spending it on the things that actually matter most to you. If that battery is fixed, then you want to spend it on the things that are most important to you. And so outsource where you can, right? If you were in the keynote, technology is one way to outsource. I personally have not found an AI that will clean my toilets, but I can pay someone else to do that for me, right? And so what can only you do and what could anybody do? It can be a great use of your resources to pay somebody to do the things that anybody could do, to free up your time for the things that only you can do. I used to be a couples counselor, and let me tell you, a cleaning service has saved many marriages, right? Because there are ongoing arguments about who should be doing the cleaning. And so when you can outsource, that's a great way of doing things. Tip number 6 is to notice your charges and drains. We kind of want to think about this battery management one. We want to think about making sure you're recharging that battery with intention, how you're spending that limited battery, and then what are the things that charge and drain during your day. And so, again, there are individual differences in the things that charge people and drain people. And so sometimes this is a great conversation to have with your team or with your family. So, for example, I have a member on my team who loves making spreadsheets. She loves putting in numbers and adding all the funky, calculation things that show up, right? I could do that, but it's just going to take me more battery than it's going to take her, right? And so giving her that task rather than me kind of is like optimizing our battery use. Same thing with your family, right? When we talk about dividing up household tasks, you sometimes want to ask, rather than delegate things to people as to what they should do, you want to ask them what they want to do, because they will pick things that they're more likely to be engaged in. I have a 15-year-old at home, and I was convinced he should be taking out the garbage, right? But when we talked about it, he decided he wanted to do cooking. Really? Okay. But it actually was a good call because he's interested in cooking. He wants to learn about it. When I leave garbage by the front door, he walks by it. He doesn't even see it, right? And so dividing up those tasks, right? There was a couple I was working with, and she would say, he cleans the kitchen, but then he leaves the cabinet doors open. Can't he just close the cabinet doors? There's another little tip. If you start a sentence with, can't you just, they actually can't. It's a really high battery cost, whatever it is that's coming after that. And so I was like, well, of course we can get him to close the cabinet doors, right? But she walks into the kitchen and all she can see is the cabinet doors open. He walks in and he's like, what are you talking about? And so it's just a higher battery cost for him to do. And so instead we kind of said, well, could she close the cabinet doors because she sees it, right? And he could do another task that's a high battery cost for her, but low battery cost for him. And so optimizing, right, these tasks. You also want to think about, what you're doing in your day. I certainly know that I have some clients who are Monday morning clients when I have lots of energy, not Friday afternoon clients when I'm on low battery, right? There are some people that you'll interact with, some clients, colleagues that kind of are just drains, right? And being mindful of that, knowing when that's in your day and being able to give yourself time to recharge after that. Right? We often talk about, had a question once about like, well, what do I do if one of those draining people is a colleague? What am I supposed to do with that, right? And what we suggest is actually to have, this happens to managers all the time. For example, they'll have a staff member who's constantly calling with problems, always wants their attention, always wants to talk about things. And what we suggest is actually set a regular time that you interact with that person, because that gives you permission to ignore them the rest of the time. Right? If you have a regular meeting, you know when it's going to happen, you know when it's going to end. It's not just thrown at you, right? And then in between those meetings, you can say, that's a great topic. Let's talk about it at our next meeting. So you're not constantly being sucked into these dramas. We also just want to acknowledge that there are some systemic causes of burnout, right? There are 6 workplace factors, things like fairness, workload, autonomy, and control that research has found impacts anybody, right? If you have bullying or harassment in your workplace, it's just a drain. That is not something you should need to be more resilient about. That's something that a workplace should take responsibility for. So we do have a whole training course on what leaders can do to address those 6 workplace factors, so that you're kind of like putting fluoride in the water. It's helping everybody rather than just people who are at risk. So we always say we want to empower the individual to do things to be well, but also create environments where it's possible to be well. I was talking to somebody in the audience earlier and saying I was giving a talk on work-life balance, and she just burst out laughing. And I was like, she's like, lawyers can't achieve work-life balance. I was like, okay, well then I'm in the right spot to give some tips, right? And I think that is definitely, there are cultural aspects to law, right, that actually are difficult to overcome when you're trying to have that work-life harmony. The next point we're going to talk about is to monitor your stress levels. And this is helpful because often people end up in crisis, and sometimes without realizing it. So we talk about the stress thermometer. And this is that there are different levels of stress, and understanding where you are on this stress thermometer can give us an early warning system so that we don't have to wait to get into red before we do something. Right? So green just means lots of extra battery, right? Probably me on vacation. Yellow is demanding but sustainable. And this is where a lot of high-performing people want to be. They're doing important things. It takes battery to do those things, but it's a sustainable level. You could keep going at this pace. And so knowing what your mind is like, what your body feels like, what your behavior is like in these different stages can help us keep into a yellow zone. Orange is demanding but unsustainable. And so we can go into orange for short periods of time, but you can't stay there. If you stay there, you're going to eventually go into red. And this happens for everybody if you keep up the stress long enough. We have an expression about if you don't listen when your body whispers, it will start to roar. And so knowing what you look like in orange, right? So when I'm in orange, I start getting headaches, but just like maybe once a week, I start getting tension in my shoulders and my arms. And I used to get really mad about that. Just be like, I need to work. Stop making me tense, right? But actually, it's a really helpful warning system so that you don't have to wait until red. This is also a really interesting exercise to do with family members, right? About asking what you look like in these different colors. Because sometimes we think we're hiding our stress oh so well. And they're like, well, you do this, or your face looks like that, right? And so knowing that. You can go into orange for short periods of time if there is a defined end. So for example, if there's a fiscal year end and after that point you can't change the numbers at all, okay, go into orange, get the task done, and then go back into yellow. But if once you finish that task, there's just another task and another task and another task, that is not a sustainable workload. And so often people wait until they're in red, they're in crisis. And this is when you're having a health problem, a mental health problem, right? When this is when you get a message that your colleague or a staff member has just gone on a 6-month medical leave out of nowhere. And sometimes it's because they were not paying attention also. We often don't pay attention until we have to. And so knowing what we're like in these different stages can actually help us make sure we don't end up in red. And so it's really helpful to have a routine of recharging, because one of the best indicators that you're in orange is that you can't regularly recharge. All right, so going to the gym is a recharging activity for me. And trust me, I don't actually enjoy it. I'm pretty sure I have resting bitch face while I'm at the gym, right? Sorry to anybody who goes to the gym with me. I'm really not like being mean to you. I don't enjoy the gym, but I can't say to myself, do I want to go to the gym? The answer is no. It's really effortful and sweaty, right? The better question is, do you want to go to the gym or do you want to yell at your kid at bedtime, right? It's a recharging activity for me. It's going to help me function better. And so once I start missing the gym 2 or 3 times a week, I'm already in orange, regardless of how I feel. So I can do that every once in a while. This week I'm traveling, so I expect that my routine's going to be off a little bit. But if I keep that up for 2, 3, 4 weeks, I'm in orange already. It doesn't really matter how I feel, because we can trick ourselves into thinking we're fine when actually we're in orange. So having those behavioral indicators that you're in orange is a really helpful thing to learn. And so here are some common stress signs that we see: physical, emotional, mental, behavioral, to again, kind of start paying attention to what you're like in these different categories. What does it feel like to be yellow for you? What does it feel like to be orange or red? Now, this is also a really helpful tool in teams to talk about your battery charge and your thermometer, your stress level. It's actually a mental health check, but with way less stigma. And so having a regular part of team meetings or interactions when you're sharing your battery, you're sharing your thermometer, right, both as a leader and then as staff members, it helps us understand where people are at, right? Who can handle more work, who's kind of at their limit, who needs help. And again, who needs to maybe take some time off so they can get back to yellow? How do we change up the tasks so that people are at a sustainable workload? The next part we're going to talk about is to spend your battery wisely, which is, we've talked about this already. It's a limited amount. And so we want to spend it on the things that really matter to you, the things that are most important to you. But how do we figure that out? So we talk about values, and this is part of an evidence-based model in psychology called acceptance and commitment therapy. It's a type of CBT, if you've heard of cognitive behavioral therapy. And values in this model have a very specific meaning. They're about how you want to show up. They're about the kind of person you want to be. They're really about what you want to give to the world, not what you want to get from the world, right? So we sometimes use that word values to say things like, I value financial freedom, but that's something you want to get from the world. Values are about how you're going to show up, how you're going to contribute to the world, how you're going to care about people, how you're going to connect with people. And so when we can explore our values, we can start to understand what really matters to us. Again, not the outcomes we're trying to achieve in life, but how we want to show up as a human. And so they're different than goals. And our society is very obsessed with goals. And goals are fine, you should have goals, but we want to keep in mind that we can't always control all the factors that lead to whether we achieve a goal or not. The outcome is going to be influenced by many things, some of which we have control over, some of which we don't. Values are always available to us because they're about how we want to show up. And so if we're willing to be flexible about how we do that, meaning we can have lots of different behavioral options for expressing our values, then you can always find a way to express your values. The other important part about values is there's no finish line, right? When we talked again about this concept of work-life balance, kind of suggests that you can get them in balance and then you're done, right? But that's not what's going to happen. You're going to have to constantly be mindful of how you're spending your battery. And so values are like that because there's no end point. If I want to show up as a kind or caring person, then I can't be like, well, in 1992, I was really nice to my sister, so I'm good, right? This is an ongoing way of showing up. When I gave that example about going to the gym, that's again another way to be value-driven about recharging your battery. This is about helping me show up as a parent that I want to be. And so you can either move towards or away from values, right? You don't get to a finish line. And we're just trying to move a little bit more towards than away. And so a toward move can be charging your battery, because charging your battery is going to allow you to do meaningful things. So values help us understand what's important to me about how I want to show up, how I want to spend that battery. And then we have these value-driven reasons for recharging. One of the things that we often get stuck on in recharging, right, is we think that it's time away from the things that matter to us. It's time away from family. It's time away from work. But actually, recharging is in the service of. It's in the service of all the things that matter to you. You're going to show up as a better human, right, if you have a charged frontal lobe. And just to keep in mind, the best place to make decisions from isn't your frontal lobe, right? You want that part of your brain. It's like a logical, thoughtful part of your brain. The best way to make decisions is actually wise mind, which is the overlap of your emotional and logical mind. Because we do need to keep those emotions in part of the decision making, right? Values have a strong emotional connection. It just feels good, right? We have that sense of, wanting that when we act consistent with our values, we feel proud of ourselves afterwards. And so I have sometimes said that happiness is a terrible life goal, which is kind of a shocking thing to say because, it's in the Constitution or all those things, right? But the reason why is that it's actually very hard to force yourself to be happy. And it's one of those emotions that comes from your survival brain that you don't have direct control over. And so making that a goal becomes exceptionally difficult because you're trying to control something that we don't actually have control over. What you do have control over is your behavior. Not unlimited control, but way more than your thoughts or feelings. And if you pick value-driven behavior, that allows us to feel positive emotions, sometimes happiness, but also things like feeling proud of ourselves, feeling accomplished, feeling like we contributed. And so you can actually get to those positive emotions, those pleasant emotions, more easily by focusing on your behavior and doing value-driven behavior than trying to be happy, right? Some people are actually really happy, heroin addicts, right? When you're actually on heroin, the lifestyle is really tricky. I'm not sure I recommend the lifestyle, right? But they feel really good while the heroin's working, right? And that's a great example of chasing the emotion actually is not a successful way of doing it. Find value-driven behaviors that then allow you to feel good about the things you're doing. So when we think about how to allocate your time and battery, if the battery is a fixed amount, then you need to make choices. If somebody asks you to take on a project, what project are you taking off your plate? Right? If somebody wants you to be on a committee, what committee do you get off of if you add on another committee? Right? One thing to think about is to add your recharging activities first and then decide what else you can do, right? I decide how much work I can get done based on putting my recharging routine in. It's in my calendar. It says go to gym, recharge. So everyone can tell that's what I'm doing. That's part of giving permission to the rest of my team to charge their battery as well, right? Add recharging activities, and then what else can you fit in? What we often do is we put all of our things in, all the stuff we need to do, and then we try to find space for the recharging activities, and we often don't, right? And so, we often then will talk about adding extra batteries to the system if there's still stuff you need to do, right, on your to-do list. So, for example, my kid, I'm from Canada, so he plays hockey, go Vancouvers, And so he plays high-level hockey, and so he is often going to practices. And at a certain point, I'm like, that's how many practices I can get you to. After this point, we need to find somebody to carpool with because I can't actually do all of these at once, right? It's going to exceed my battery, so how do we add extra batteries to the system? And honestly, if I could figure out how to get his hockey gear in an Uber, I would do that. Okay, so an activity becomes an away move when you can't regularly recharge. When you go from yellow to orange, whatever it is you're doing is actually an away move. This is like really when we talk about work. We hope that work is a towards move for you, that it's something that allows you to contribute to the world, to express your values. But do it too much and it becomes an away move. And so that's what I sometimes have to remind myself that, sending the extra email, staying up late to do the thing, actually is not a towards move. It's now an away move because I'm not going to have any energy tomorrow. And so again, spend your battery on the things that matter most, that only you can do. And again, values exploration can help us figure out what that is for us. Tip number 9 is about how to use the science of habit formation. So James Clear is going to give a talk. He's got a great book that actually lays out some of the science of habit formation. And so when we use some of those tips, it's like working smarter rather than working harder. And so here are some questions that you can ask yourself that will help you actually embed the science of behavior change into your plans. So if you wanted to build the habit of recharging, for example, the first question is, who or what benefits if I'm charged? Let's find a value-driven reason, not just because you should, right? Health is not a value. It's a means to an end. It allows you to do stuff that matters to you, but health in and of itself is not a value. Right, so answer that question. Who benefits if you have a charged frontal lobe? So yourself benefits, right? All the people you care about are going to benefit. Probably all the people you interact with are going to benefit if you've ever yelled at someone in traffic before, right? And all the things that matter to you. You're going to do a better job if you have a charged frontal lobe. You're going to make fewer errors. You're going to perform better. You're going to do a better job at whatever it is. You're going to show up as a better version of yourself if you have a charged frontal lobe. And so again, this isn't time away from work. It's not time away from your family. This is in the service of your family. It's in the service of your work. You're contributing to doing that better by charging your frontal lobe. What are my towards moves? What behaviors can I do that are going to move me towards, right? This is about having that list of recharging activities. And again, lots of different ones that you can do depending on the circumstances. Again, sometimes just taking a break and having lunch is a great idea. When a crisis comes into my inbox, the first thing I think is, when's the last time I ate? Because I'm going to need a charged frontal lobe to problem solve this thing. So before I try to tackle it, I'm just going to go have lunch and then I'm going to tackle this crisis. What are my away moves? What are the things that you're doing when you could be recharging? This is actually how you can find extra time in your day, because most of us do things that actually are not recharging and probably draining. Classic ones would be being on your phone, right, or social media. And if you actually pay attention to that, it's easy to do. It doesn't take a lot of battery. That's why we do it. But if you pay attention, you're probably not feeling more charged at the end of it. And in fact, you could be feeling more drained. And so paying attention to those things, those away moves when we could be recharging, is how you find extra time in your day. And then lastly, what internal thoughts and feelings are going to show up that are going to get in the way? Things like feeling guilty, things like, I don't have time for that. Thoughts like, I don't have time for that. I'll do it tomorrow. These are all things that show up from our survival brain and stop us from making those towards moves. And so there are a number of skills that we teach, right? This is our 30-minute presentation. We actually have a full day course on charging your battery, and we teach people skills to handle those internal thoughts and feelings that get in the way of recharging your battery. So my last tip is don't do it alone. It's a really great idea if you can actually get your team together to talk about these things. If everybody understands what batteries and thermometers are, it's really helpful, because that's how you change culture. That's how you change the culture of an organization. And if any of you have younger generations in your workplace, they expect this, right? They expect to be able to take a mental health day. They expect their companies to be taking care of them, to care about their mental health. And so we do need to find a way to help them be engaged. Now, sometimes with older generations, we're actually trying to teach them to hold back. Sometimes with younger generations, we're like, you use your battery not just to feel good, but to do things that matter. And doing things that matter can feel hard. You have to be willing to experience discomfort to do things that matter. It is it's part of the deal. And so these are some additional resources. We have an app, because of course there's an app for that, where we have a whole course of Charge Your Battery. We also have the leadership course on the 6 workplace factors. And so you can download that from our website. It's not yet on the App Store, but you can download it from there. We also do executive coaching for people who are looking for that personalized support about how to maintain their wellness. And then workplace presentations and training. And so if you'd like a talk, I do virtual talks as well as in-person talks to workplaces. You can all learn that same language and then figure out, again, how you can maintain that. Part of the app is that you can continue the training after the workshop is done, right? So there's a feature on the app where you can track your battery and your thermometer and share it with the rest of your team. And so you can automatically update everyone on the team about how you're doing, which is a great way to monitor remote teams, for example. Okay. And that's it. And that's my social media. If you'd like to follow me, I often post about videos on the same topic. So thank you.